Hi, everybody. Welcome to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting edge conversation and all kinds of surprises while exploring the quantum possibilities. We're going to have an interesting show tonight, a little bit, a little bit different. Different is always good, but pretty interesting as well. Before we get started, I want to invite you to the what? to the community, to the membership community, the YouTube membership community. It's, when you go to a concert and you get to go backstage, it's kind of like that. Or if you get to go to an after party with the band or something like that, it's a little bit more intimate. You get to meet us, you get to talk with us. There's going to be special content, exclusive content only for the membership community. And you also get first look at our new videos and things that are upcoming. The link is right on the Facebook, on the YouTube page. And I had acupuncture today and I'm like floating. I mean, I'm just like up on a cloud somewhere. I couldn't find my car and I parked it right outside of the place. So the link is on the YouTube page and Mac will put it in the chat and we would love to have you there. We're just getting started. So if you were there early, thank you for your patience. Launching things like this is always, just sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge, but we're there and we're rocking and we're rolling. And Augie, tell us about our guest who is coming. He's on his way.
Yes, I will. And before I even do that, I want to say something about this membership group also, is that when you sign up, send us an email so we know your email address, because for the first 10 people, we're going to have a gift going your way. So if you hurry up, you might just be one of those 10 people. But we need to know your mailing address. So just do that also. Send us an email and then we will get in touch with you. Now, tonight is going to be good because we have Daniel Duke with us. And I want to say his website first. That is authordanielduke.com. authordanielduke.com. And what I said that he's with us is not quite true, because he was here, but he was going to go to a different computer to get a better connection. So he will be here again. Now, we will speak with the great-great-grandson of the outlaw Jesse James. Think of this. A lot of people think that Elvis Presley faked his death. And there is an awful lot of evidence to the fact that, yes, he did. But there may have been another 140 years ago who also faked his death. And it's starting to look like Jesse James did just that. And now Daniel also discovered where we might find the lost treasure, actually the Templar treasure. And he's pretty sure he found where it is. And that is not the only treasure he talks about or writes about. He has written 3 books, and his mom has written 3 books on the same kind of subjects. And there it looks like Daniel is joining us. So now we're going to be good. And I'm going to continue with my introduction here. And he writes about the treasures and the mysteries and lores of the past. And for those of you who are interested in how people lived back then, ancient treasures and our hidden history, keep your ears wide open, because here it comes. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thanks. It's an honor to be on your show.
Oh, now you sound much better.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Excellent. So, Daniel, this is so interesting. And my real question, I'm going to hold off, but like, if we know where the treasure is, why aren't we going there? But let's wait for that. I'm curious, and I would love for the audience to get to know you. How did this all come about for you? What brought you to this here and now?
This all started with my late mother, Betty Dorset Duke. Um, she had grown up all her life hearing stories at family get-togethers and holidays. All the old timers would say that Jesse faked his death. He didn't die like history said he did, and he lived to be an old age in Texas. Um, and so she grew up hearing that Jesse James was her great grandfather, and that he had died um, at an old age. And then when she went to school, and you'd see little blurbs in history books and also TV movies. They claimed Jesse was shot in the back of the head by Bob Ford, one of his fellow gang members. So she wondered, for years she wondered who was right, her family or accepted history, traditional history. So after my sister and I got into college, my late mother had finally had time to 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 research. She did the genealogy, got all the family photos collected and together. We'd also had Jesse's diary and an old treasure map passed down through the family. But she took the photos, and we all agreed the photos of our family photos looked just like the historically accepted photos. But we didn't want to go on our word, and she knew, we needed experts to verify that whether or not the photos were authentic, or were the same people. So she took our family photos to the Department of Public Safety, which is in Texas. That's our state police. She went to their headquarters in Austin, and at their forensic lab, they verified that our photos matched the historically accepted photos. And then after that, she went to the Austin Police Department for photographic forensic lab. They also verified our photos matched. And there was a third group called Visionics, who did they were experts in facial recognition technology, and they sold their programs and all their software to the military and international airports, people like that. And they verified that our photos matched the historically accepted photos of not only Jesse, but his mother, Frank, his brother, and several other family members. So we thought, okay, this is amazing. This rewrites history as far as an Old West outlaw was concerned. And we thought people would be happy. And most people, didn't care either way. But a lot of people were happy about it, except for the ones we thought would be happiest. The people in Missouri at the James Farman Museum didn't want to hear a thing about it. And that puzzled us. We didn't know why they didn't want to hear. And then years later, we figured out, they were making $7 million a year on tourism back in the late 90s. I don't know what they're making now, but right up the road from them, they were good friends with the guy who owned the home in St. Joseph, Missouri, where Jesse was allegedly shot. And that would have probably hurt his business a lot. And I think that's where a lot of the backlash came from the Missouri group. It ended up leading people connected with those two groups, ended up sending death threats to my late mother and my sister and myself. And fortunately, the FBI stepped in and put a stop to the death threats. So, but it was interesting. But that's how we got into the research. And then, over the years, we kept researching. Reading his diary, for example, he listed a lot of known James gang members and other names that nobody knew was associated to the James gang. And later we found out were famous Texas ranchers and a lot of other people. So we kept researching. And while if anytime my mom, like, I would switch back and forth from helping with genealogy and any other research on anybody mentioned in the books, or anyone who had anything to do with Jesse, I would switch from that to the treasure map that was passed down through the family. That constantly caught my attention. And I wanted to, the treasure, who wouldn't want to find the treasure? That just seemed perfect. The only problem with the map that he had, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but it didn't have any topographical landmarks listed. It was just a geometrical design with a lot of code written on it. And the code was fairly easy to figure out, but we had no topographic markers to start from. So it's, it was kind of up in the air for years as to where we went, where to start. But then and I was never going to write anything about the treasures until my late mother passed away in 2015. And that caught us all off guard. It was unexpected. She 1 minute she was fine, next minute she passed away. And months later, I decided to go ahead and write the book. And just everything I knew, I wanted to get it out there and write it. And throughout the years, on top of that, in addition to that, I had, and I know this sounds corny to some people, but after researching the treasures and finally finding out all the groups it was tied to and the importance behind a lot of these treasures, it's not something that's meant for any one man. And I know that sounds corny to some people, but in my heart, I just followed what I believe, and it's not meant for me. It's meant for something much greater.
How do you think that Jesse James came into possession of this map, or did he have it?
He had it, and I think, well, I know Jesse buried more treasures than he had ever been credited for stealing. He buried more gold than he stole, and that was an enigma in itself. When I first began the research, I thought, how could he possibly bury more than he stole? And eventually I found the answer. It tied in with Freemasonry and several other groups. So, but I think Freemasonry was the main reason behind a lot of what the James gang did.
Yeah. The Freemasonry dates back quite a while, into about 1776 or something like that, I think. So that could very well have been part of this. Yeah,
I believe it was. Modern Freemasonry goes back a little further than that, but a lot of people credit Sir Francis Bacon with the formation of modern day Freemasonry, and legends and lore dates it further back. A lot of people tie it back to the ancient Egyptians and even further to the Sumerians and others. But I think, well, after the research I did, it was when I discovered how the maps worked, and I wanted to know how much who did this, why they did it. There was a lot of questions. Why would they bury these treasures? Why would they put it in a template that was in the shape of the Jewish Kabbalistic tree of life, and the grid system, which represents the three veils of negative existence that goes along with the tree of life? And I couldn't understand why they would go to such great lengths to bury some treasures. And it dawned on me later, but it goes back all the way to the Templar.
Wow.
So that, yeah.
Well, how does it trace back to them? I mean.
Okay. Well, like from Jesse, for example, starting with Jesse, he was a Freemason. I believe, but I don't have proof, but I do believe that he was, I guess his first exposure to Freemasonry probably came during the Civil War when he was a teenager fighting with Cointreau's guerrillas. He and his band of guerrillas had camped out several times with Albert Pike, the famous 33rd degree Freemason. Albert Pike was a brigadier general for the Confederacy, and they'd camped out in the same camp many times. I think that may have been where his exposure to Freemasonry came from. It could have also came down the line through his family as well, because several of Jesse's ancestors were also Freemasons. So I'm not sure where he got his exposure, but I think he joined during the Civil War. I know for a fact he was a Freemason after the Civil War, under his alias of James Lafayette Courtney. But
that makes perfect sense, because we know that Freemasons, they protect each other and they take care of each other. So after that, he faked his death and then moved to Texas. It's very likely that he had the Freemasons and the judges at the time and everybody in position of power, they were protecting him.
That's true. I agree 100%. He after the Civil War, well, I think during the Civil War and after, when as a Freemason, I think he was in a way during the Civil War, what he would have been considered very much, he and the men he rode with would have been like modern day special forces soldiers. And I know throughout history, from the time the Catholic Church first raided the Templar strongholds back in 1307, the Catholics and the Templar, who later melded in with different groups like the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, I think, well, they've been at war off and on throughout the centuries. And I think there was, I believe, like a lot of Old West outlaws, not just Jesse, but several others, I believe were involved in that war. I think they weren't just after gold all the time. They were also after information, documents, different things. They would rob stages. Sometimes they got very little gold and silver, but they would also take documents with them. And I've always found that interesting. But I'm trying to, let's see, and forgive me if I get off the track. There's so many rabbit holes to go down on this.
Yeah. Well, being a Mason, you're very concerned also about the number 33, because think of that. There's 33 in the United States anyway. There's 33 grades of Masonry. And then
Yes.
Solomon's Temple, that stood for 33 years. The Temple of Jerusalem lasted for 33 years. And King David ruled for 33 years. Jesus is said to be executed at the age of 33. What is about the 33 that has all those commonalities? What? That's one thing that interests me. What do you think?
I personally, and this is just my thoughts, when you look at the Kabbalistic tree of life, for example, there are 10 Sephiro or 10 Sephira and 22 paths. So the 22 paths with the 10 Sephira add up to 32. I'm a 32nd degree Freemason, but and I don't by any means know all the secrets of Freemasonry, but the 32 paths, I think 33 could be viewed by some as a step above that, almost as on the verge of reaching a state of divinity in a way, if that makes any sense. Symbolically, maybe being at one with God, knowing yourself, there's a lot of things that could go into that. But I think you've got 32 paths, and then above the tree of life is where God resides.
I know of one that have talked about in the United States, you can go to 33 degrees of Masonry, and that's it. But in Europe, among the real elite, you can go to 92nd degrees. Are you aware of that?
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So they get into more, from what I understand of it, is that up to 33 degrees, it's more spiritual in nature, or more of the well-being of people. But above the 33, that's where the real secrets come in and global dominance come in, all the way up to 92nd. Because one of the requirements to be Pope is that you have to be a 92nd degree Mason.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. There's a lot tied in with that. And to answer, back to the question as to how it tied into the Templar, starting with Jesse, Albert Pike, it was almost like doing a family tree, but for an organization. So I went from Albert Pike, it goes back, Freemasonry, back to the founding fathers, many of whom were the founding fathers of the United States, many of whom were Freemasons. Tie that back, it goes, over to the UK, England, and Europe. In England, I traced it back to Sir Francis Bacon. And when I found, Sir Francis Bacon, I thought, okay, this is the guy who did it. I'm satisfied. I've reached the end. I finally figured out that. And I was satisfied for about 3 days, and I had nagging questions that kept bothering me. I looked deeper and I found out it didn't stop with Sir Francis Bacon. His mentor, for example, was John Dee, who a lot of people, John Dee was a legend unto himself. He was a Renaissance man, a genius, spy, an alchemist, advisor to the Queen. They call him the original 007 because his alchemical, when he would sign letters to the Queen, he used an alchemical symbol that looked like 2 zeros and a 7. It went past him through famous people, well-known people, John Locke, Christopher Wren, different people of those in those days. It went past that to I eventually tied it in with Jewish rabbis. There was a long line of Jewish rabbis that tied back to Rashi, a rabbi known as Rashi, who was the favored court guest of Hugh, the Count of Champagne, who was one of the founding Templar Knights. And that blew my mind. I know I said that real quick. In my first book, I listed out all the connections from one person to another, but it goes back to the Templar Knights. And I thought, okay, so I've got that. I know who started this. It was the Templar Knights, but why? I wanted to know why they used the certain dimensions and distances in their templates. Just different measurements, like the number 19, for example, and others, 17, 15. There was a lot of different measurements on small and large templates, and they all tied in with not only Jewish Kabbalah, but Middle Eastern. It was Jewish, Christian, and occult Kabbalah combined, where I found a lot of my answers. And there was also Sufi mysticism and other traditions that tied in with that. And that blew my mind. It wasn't just Christian and Judaism or occult. It was also people in other Middle Eastern religions. That amazed me. So I found all the meanings behind, a lot of the meanings, not all, but most that I was looking for. And I thought, okay, when I come out with this book, people are going to think I'm crazy. But I went ahead and did it. And I found out shortly before the first book was published and hit the shelves, that the current Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Timothy Hogan, wrote a glowing endorsement for my book, claiming that I'd cracked part of the code dealing with the treasures of the temple in Jerusalem. And that made my day. When I heard that, I thought, I finally know. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I know I was on the right track.
Wow, that's huge. That's huge.
The temple, yeah, Nori, go ahead.
Thank you, Margaret. She just sent us a super chat, and she also became a member of the membership community. So thank you, Margaret. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Now, when it comes to the temple on the mound, you talked about some code in there. In Jewish religion, they have a schedule for when the new one will be built.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked into that? Because that could create some challenges locally over there.
That could. I would imagine that would create all-out war at some point. And that always worries me. I haven't looked into that just because that didn't deal with what I was searching with. I am curious about it, but I haven't looked. It's also, I don't like thinking of war. So
let's revisit that treasure map for a little bit. Do you think you know where the lost Templar treasure is? Are you at liberty to talk about it? And when are we going to go and dig it up?
I think much of it, I think I do know where they've buried it in the Americas, including parts of Canada, the United States, and parts of Mexico as well. Some of it has been recovered. One of the the former Attorney General for the state of Texas, Wagner Carr, who was also coincidentally set in on the Warren Commission after JFK was assassinated, but that's a whole different topic. Wagner Carr, he was interested in Jesse James and the treasures, and he used to talk to my mother all the time. He would call her. One day, he finally decided to send his driver out to pick my mother and I up, and the driver showed us where 3 large treasures used to be that were recovered, and each of those treasures were located on the template. And that amazed me. So I know they've recovered some. I asked him, according to Wagner Carr, the Texas Rangers oversaw the recovery. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I asked him what they did with it. He never would answer me. And I thought, okay, I wasn't a Freemason. He was a Freemason, by the way, also. I wasn't a Freemason at the time, and I don't know if that had anything to do with why he didn't answer me, but he didn't. Some of the other treasures, like I believe there may still be Williamsburg, Virginia. That's where the Tree of Life template starts in Williamsburg, Virginia, and it stretches across the U.S. to Victoria Peak, New Mexico. Now, Victoria Peak, New Mexico, I know the treasure that was there was recovered. There's a lot of evidence, and also the Attorney General for the state of New Mexico had mentioned it. Not only that, the Victoria Peak treasures were mentioned in the Watergate hearings, and that was wild. I thought, oh my God, this treasure was mentioned in the Watergate hearings, and it's almost like the further you dig, the more mind-blowing evidence you find, and it's part of our government documents that are available to the public. So there were powerful people with governors, attorney generals, all the way up to the president of the United States, and the Watergate hearings and things like that dealt with some of these treasures. I do think there are still some large treasures out there. I know there's some large treasures. I just don't know. I don't know why they chose to dig up certain treasures and leave others where they are for now. I have no idea. Marie Bauer Hall, she was the wife of Manly Palmer Hall, the famous 33rd degree Mason who wrote The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Marie had used encryptions she found in the works of Shakespeare and the writings of Sir Francis Bacon, who she believed was one of the main authors of Shakespeare. She used those encryptions. It led her to Williamsburg, Virginia. And then in the cemetery at a church called Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg, Virginia, there's anagrams on a lot of the headstones that she also decoded. And she told everybody back in the day, this was 40, 50 years ago, that all the encryptions in the works of Shakespeare and the anagrams on the headstones in the cemetery led to the original foundations of the original church that had been there. And people mocked her. They didn't believe her. She proved them wrong. She said, okay, well, do you give me permission to dig so I can find out whether I'm right or wrong? She proved them wrong. She found the original foundations. And beyond that, it looked like a tomb, but it served as an altar in the original church. And she went further to state that beneath that altar, 20 feet below it, was a vault that contained not only traditional treasures like gold and jewels and things, but also information that would shake government, that would shake history and religious history also. Shake the pillars of history and religion. And I don't know what's in there. That's all she would say. As far as as much as I've read on that, that's the most detailed I could get on that. She started to excavate, and then they put a stop to it. They even put her in jail for a night and ran her out of town, basically. Shortly after she was run out of town, it said that the Rockefeller family purchased much of the town around that. And they don't own the church, but they control the board of directors that oversee the church, which I always thought was very interesting.
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat room. Put your seatbelt on. The question is it true that the Freemasons go to Bohemian Grove every year, or is that just a rumor or a myth?
As far as I know, it's just a rumor. I've been in when I first joined, especially. I asked some of the fellow Masons, do they do that? And one of them joked and said, "I wish we had that much fun. We usually just sit around and collect money to give to charity." So I mean, there's a lot of learning involved, but I've never heard of. I've heard of Bohemian Grove, but I've never heard a legitimate tie with Freemasonry to Bohemian Grove.
Yeah,
In fact, I always laughed when I read the quote. President Nixon was said to have gone to Bohemian Grove, and he had a colorful quote about what his thoughts were on that. He didn't like it at all. I don't know if it dealt with Freemasonry or not, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I would imagine that if the Masons did go, it wouldn't be something they admit to,
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well,
Interesting.
some of the people going there probably could happen to be Masons, so that don't
That's
necessarily
true.
mean that the organization is behind it.
That's
But
true. Very true.
on the other hand, too, when speaking about the Templars, I'm going to recite a story and tell you, because decades ago, I read an article in a European newspaper saying that there was a monastery in Ireland. In there was a rolled up paper, I guess you could call it a scroll if you like, then that explained that they had outfitted a ship by the Templars that was low in the water, and they wondered if it would be able to make the journey because it headed west. And of course, the demise of the Templars started in France, and then many of them escaped to England, and then supposedly stories say that they were done away with. Well, they really didn't. They escaped to the New World, and that paper from that monastery in England, I think, could explain some of that, because they outfitted it with water and food, but it was sitting low in the water. And I wonder why. Maybe it was heavy.
It could have been. I bet it was.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Maybe somebody could dig that one up again. I have no idea where to look for that story anymore, but it was in a European newspaper. And
so what's the most exciting piece of information, Daniel, that you've dug up?
Oh God. Well, that's a hard question. That's a good question. It's very hard to answer, just because when we started this, my late mother, we were just thinking, okay, it's an Old West outlaw, and it's an Old West outlaw. Of course, he had his own notoriety, famous, infamous. Different people look at it different ways, but then it just kept opening door after door after door down different paths that I never thought I would have gone down. The most I thought of Kabbalah when I first touched on that topic, and that researching the treasures led me to that. I thought of Kabbalah as nothing more than a Hollywood fad that people wore a red string on their wrist, and that was that. And then I found out it goes far beyond that. But I'd say one of the most interesting that sticks out right now is in Jesse's diary that we have. He mentioned going while he was in Texas. He and some of the fellow gang members hopped a train, and they rode through Marshall, Texas, all the way to Shreveport, Louisiana. They got on a riverboat and rode south to Nacogdoches, got off the riverboat and went on the Louisiana side and rode on horseback north along a stage route. And they robbed a stagecoach, and they stayed at the house of a man named Gervais Fontenot. Well, I thought, okay, who's this Gervais Fontenot? I researched him and found out he was a retired U.S. Marshal. And I thought, why would the James gang stay the night at a U.S. Marshal's house? This doesn't make sense to me. And this was early in my research. Well, so I decided to check out the genealogy of Gervais Fontenot. I was checking anything I could find on the man, and I found out he was the nephew to the famous pirate Jean Lafitte. And I thought, okay, this is weird. Jesse was a Mason, and that blew my mind. And then I find out he's staying at the house of Jean Lafitte's nephew, which blew my mind. And so I started researching Jean Lafitte more than I ever had before. And I found out Jean Lafitte, during the War of 1812, had Masonic connection, or actually Masonic communications with Andrew Jackson. And this was before Andrew Jackson was a president. The fact that Jean Lafitte and Andrew Jackson had Masonic communication says that both men were Masons, including Jean Lafitte. And I thought that to me highlighted a deeper network within Freemasonry. It wasn't, Jesse was a Freemason, Jean Lafitte was a Freemason, the president of the U.S., or that president, Andrew Jackson, was a Freemason, and it just kept the Freemasons. I would find out, a little at a time, a lot of people connected this were Freemasons, and that just blew my mind. It was almost like a much larger network. And Jean Lafitte himself has a multitude of treasure legends tied with him. He would attack Spanish ships. His excuse for it was often that his grandmother was a Jewess who suffered in the Inquisitions in Spain. And so he would attack any Spanish-backed ship that he came across. And I thought that just ties back into the old legend, the story of the Templar and their war with the Catholic Church.
Sounds like a big club.
Yeah, it does.
and we're not in it.
Daniel is.
Well, you can join. I have a friend in England, and she's a lady, Philippa Lee. She's an author. And I find this interesting. In the U.S., you don't hear of female Masons at all, yeah. Freemasons. But in England and a lot of Europe, it's widely accepted now.
Interesting.
Yep.
Are
absolutely.
there female Freemasons in the United States that just don't talk about it, or?
There have been some. It's very rare, but in Europe and in the UK, it's widely accepted.
That's interesting.
Yeah. We had them in Norway too. It was the Rebeccas, they called them, and there was a huge organization.
It's amazing. So you're from Norway?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a friend from Norway, Ingvar Olsen. I met him.
Yeah.
He won, I think, Norwegian Idol in their contest. He stayed at my house about 2 months ago. Real nice guy.
Yeah, Olsen, that sounds Norwegian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I got another question that I just wanted to run by you, and I wonder if people are also interested in hearing this, and that is that, we're talking about 140 years ago, 160, 100 years or more. How did people live let's say 140, 160 years ago? I know life was hard. You didn't have a lot of the commodities we have today. But what was it like to live back then? Could you maybe talk on that a little bit?
Oh, God, it would have been a lot harder. Just day-to-day life. Like when I wake up in the morning and make coffee, I go to the sink and turn on the faucet to put water in the coffee pot. Back then, you had to go outside with a bucket to the well, lower the bucket down into the well, draw your water out, and then come back in. You had to build a fire for the heat to boil your water to make your coffee. The coffee was hard to come by. You had to go to the store and buy it if you were lucky. A lot of people didn't even have coffee. They would grind up, like in Texas, for example, the mesquite trees. They would get the beans off the mesquite trees and they harvested those by hand. And mesquites are full of thorns, so that wasn't an easy job. And they would grind the mesquite beans up and make a coffee substitute out of that. And that's just for the cup of coffee. Then to start the rest of the day, they had to, if they wanted grain to feed their chickens and their livestock, they had to harvest that grain or go buy it from someone. It was everything was hard manual labor. And always that brings up another question I was talking about with someone not too long ago. If when I look at photographs of my ancestors, they're very lean people. They're not overweight by any means. And
Nope.
you look at people today, like America, for example, is full of overweight people. And it's because I think we've got it too easy.
Yep. Yeah, luckily they didn't have McDonald's back then.
Yeah, that's true. No one would have done anything. They
Yeah.
would have just sat around McDonald's and ate burgers. So
When we hear of the wild, wild west, I guess there are, bad news always travel faster, and but they was pretty peaceful mostly, because people had guns. Everybody owned a gun pretty much, and in fact, that is gone all the way up into the 1970s. But in my first job in the United States, I walked into a bar in Ainsworth, Nebraska, sat down at the counter, and there was a cowboy coming up sitting next to me, and he had a 6-shooter on each leg. He was a cowboy. And
yeah,
I sat there and I kind of looked at him, and and he asked me something, and I'm not sure how it came about, but he says, we had a short conversation, and he says, "Hey, this is my outfit." So he didn't want to talk or nothing. He just told me, "Hey, this is my outfit." Well, on the prairie, you had coyotes, you have wild animals and stuff, and it made sense to be armed.
that's true.
Yeah,
It does. Well,
but it was usually peaceful.
that even today, a lot of people who live in the country in Texas, ranchers and farmers and different people, they like to have a weapon near them just because of that reason. You could rattlesnakes, copperheads, different types of snakes, coyotes,
Yep.
all kinds of things. So you never know when you might need your gun.
Absolutely.
I grew up that way. Growing up, I grew up out in the country, and we chopped our firewood, and I hunted and ate deer and things like that. And it was natural for me to have a gun in the house. And a lot of people today have changed, but it was mostly a tool, in my opinion, just a tool to
Yeah.
use to buy.
Yeah, it's amazing. I still think that having a gun makes it more peaceful, because think of it. The murder capital of the world is Chicago, and people are not allowed to have guns. So
That's true.
who in their right mind would steal the purse of a woman knowing that she might have a gun in her pocket?
Yeah.
Only the village idiot would do that, and there's not that many of them.
Yeah, my late grandmother, I called her Mama. Mama had a pistol in her glove box in her car, one in her purse, and she slept with one under her pillow. I don't know why she wanted one under her pillow, but she lived a peaceful life.
Yep. Yep. A well-armed society is a polite society.
Yes, that's true.
And most people never have a reason to use it.
That's true.
Anyway, yeah.
So in the chat room, Cece said, Freemasons have many subgroups and factions, one being the Order of the Eastern Star, which allows women to join. My grandmother was high up in the organization. It has many groups in the United States even today. I thought I read that. So thank you for clarifying that.
That's true. They have different groups for women, like the Eastern Star. There's other groups, but they're not considered. And what's interesting to me is a Freemason, a man, can join the Eastern Star, but it's very rare to have a woman join a Masonic lodge.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think I don't know. There's different, that could get controversial, but I think it's, for some reason, it's like America is ahead of the times in some areas, but behind in others. And that's the best way I can say it. I think we're catching up slowly. Like in Europe, for example, in the UK, there's no problem with women being Freemasons. Here, it's more of a tradition in a way. You know, it's always been men, and that's how it needs to be. Where that's what some people say. I personally don't mind if a woman is a Freemason or not.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, there's a
I
lot
grew
of
up
good
in
education.
Yeah, that's true.
I've been invited 3 times, and I turned them down all 3 times. But there's a lot of good information in there, historical and spiritual information too.
That's true.
Yeah. Now, you speak of, there's another issue of the 7 cities of gold.
Yes.
I would love to hear a little more about that.
I personally, and that's good. That type, the old legend of the 7 cities, Cibola, the 7 cities of gold. Um, uh, oh God, Spanish explorers had searched for it. And that's another thing that shocked me. There different people who had come through. Like there was a man who came through, and his name escapes my mind right now. Oh God, I wish I could remember his name. He was a black Muslim from Africa. He was a slave to the Spaniards when they came. The Spanish explorers came over. They wrecked in Florida. They went on foot from Florida across the South all the way to Texas, and Estebanico, that was his name. So Estebanico was one of the 2 survivors. The final, out of hundreds of men, 2 men survived this trek from Florida across the South to Texas, all the way back to Mexico City. It was Estebanico and a Catholic monk. And this monk, they both reached Mexico City. They wrote their report, submitted it, and went back to Spain. And the Spanish king ordered them to go out again and explore, those 2, and ordered them. They headed north. They went to New Mexico, current day New Mexico, and Estebanico and the monk didn't get along. It's 2 different religious beliefs. There's a lot of different things. Estebanico was trading turquoise rocks for wives. When he would meet like the Zuni and Hopi Indians, he would trade turquoise and his healing. He was known as a healer. So I guess he used his skills to gain more wives. And the monk didn't like this. Apparently, from the story, they had fought often. When they traveled, they stayed about a half a day apart or more. And the legend is that Estebanico just died. The Zuni Indians claimed he died, or at least that's what the monk reported. I often wonder if he didn't just find his little piece of heaven and disappear into the wilderness somewhere. You never know. But it was interesting to me to know that a black Muslim man from Africa was one of the first explorers in the state of Texas and all across the South. That to me was very interesting. Long before most European settlers had ever come through, and the reason I come up with that, I've got friends from, a lot of people do, from different religious backgrounds in parts of the world. And I know in the little town I grew up in, there was one man, Ali was his name. He owned a store, and people would come into his store and give him a hard time, telling him to go back where he came from. And I thought, well, okay, if they read their history, there was a Muslim here long before they were ever here, or before their ancestors were here. And I thought that was interesting. I don't agree with bashing people or trying to run people off or just based on their religion or color. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting story.
Yeah, we only have about 6 minutes left. So tell people how they can find you or find your books.
Okay, my website's authordanielduke.com. You can find my books anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million, my publisher, innertraditions.com. Simon and Schuster. There's anywhere books are sold, pretty much anywhere in the world. You can order them or buy them at Walmart, Target, etc. Or you can Google me and Daniel Duke and Jesse James or Daniel Duke author and find out a lot about me. My sister Teresa Faye Duke is also a co-author for my second book. You can find, let's see, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm also on. You can just search for my name and find me pretty easy.
Yeah. And for the listeners, I also want to say that there is a little confusion on the website, because in some of the places and also some of the shows that you've done in the past, the host actually call it the wrong name, but it is author DanielDuke.com, not Dan Duke. So it's Daniel Duke, author DanielDuke.com.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Make sure you do that right. But go to the website and look around. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. So, and for those that is interested in the past and how people lived and all these traditions, and maybe you got a treasure map of your own, just go check it out.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's
now,
true.
What's next for you now? More books or?
Oh God, there's a lot. It also, before I forget, my late mother's website, I keep that going. That's just jessewjames.com. So if people are interested in Jessie, my mother's work is much of her work is on that website. As for in the future, I've got a lot of there's always more. There's a lot more. A lot of people, and this another thing that blew my mind. Jesse James, when living in Texas under his alias, lived next door in Blevins, Texas, to Bonnie Parker. You know Bonnie and Clyde, the famous outlaws. Bonnie Parker's grandfather, her maternal grandfather, was neighbors with Jesse, and and in the treasure map that was passed down through the family, along with that was a clipping of the death of Bonnie and Clyde. I always thought that was interesting.
Wow.
Just makes me wonder.
Jesse James, he died under the name of James Courtney.
That's right. That's right. James Lafayette Courtney in Blevins, Texas, which is about 22 miles from Waco, Texas.
Oh, okay. So what year was that he died?
1943.
43. Wow.
Yep.
He was an old man.
He was at the age of 97.
Wow. Wow.
Augie, do you want to ask a famous question?
Oh, yes. I want to ask a question that I love this question, and that is that if you could talk to the whole world and the world is listening, what would you tell them?
History isn't always what you think it is. And to always keep an open mind and dig deeper. Any question you have, dig, and don't let people tell you you're wrong. Keep digging. Find the facts for yourself.
That's good.
Well, you should have done that. That took you years to put all that together.
Yeah, it was over 25 years, and thanks to I credit it all to my late mother, Betty Dorsett Duke. She was my hero.
Yeah. And to the listeners, go check it out. Read about Jesse James, the Lost Templar Treasure, and the Lost Templar Treasure. Check that out, because that is an interesting book. You'll hear a lot more about the Templar treasure and other treasures as well. And the story of Jesse James, how he faked his death, is very interesting. For those of you out there that remember the comment I did on Elvis Presley, check that one out too, because there is a lot of evidence. These things happen. People do this. Amazing.
They're probably all living in the Cayman Islands.
Sounds like a good idea. So.
Right?
Oh, that sounds like heaven right now.
Yeah, it's chilly. Oh, thank you
Okay.
so much. Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing
Well-
your wealth of knowledge with us and for spending time with us and for adjusting your location for a better signal. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This is a great honor to
Yeah,
me, and I
yes.
appreciate it.
So thank you very much for being with us, and we are off.
Take care,
All right.
everybody. Happy Thanksgiving to those